Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Hey, before we get into the show tonight, we wanted to let you know we appreciate all of you who watch us as often as you can. And by the way, we have new people watching and enjoying the show all the time, even if it's on accident. That actually happened to someone named Pat last night who emailed us and said, I mistakenly recorded the 6 p.m. news tonight, and when I went to erase it, your segment, The Story, was on. I'm amazed that there's a local newscast in Portland where I can watch to get true, fair, and unbiased news. I've never emailed a reporter, but I'm so impressed with your presentation that I'm a new viewer. Keep up the great work. Hey, thanks, Pat. We hope that you're watching tonight on purpose, and we're glad you're here. We have a big tent. It's open for everyone. And in the meantime, we've got a great show ahead of us. We'll be talking about taxes. The state revenue forecast came out today. It has huge implications. We'll talk a little bit about history, too. But first, let's talk about the homeless crisis and a population of unsheltered people that we often do not hear much about. Families with young children. And that is our big story tonight. According to this year's point-in-time count, children without shelter accounted for roughly a third of the total increase in homelessness in Multnomah County. They are an invisible community, though, and that's often on purpose. Parents keep their campsites hidden deep in the woods, and they're always on the move. Blair Best found one homeless family willing to talk on camera, but they did not want to show their faces, afraid the state would take away the children.
Hiding in plain sight, a survival tactic this single mom has honed throughout her time on the street.
We were in and out of shelters for a while. I lived at a DV shelter for more than a year, and there was drug use in the shelter. We were surrounded by it.
So she and her 2 young children moved to the only place she felt safe, a tent deep in the woods in Gresham.
We found a spot in the woods. We stayed safe. We had our dogs. People weren't allowed to come mess with us.
They also camped under the Hawthorne Bridge.
And you'd see some tweaker walk by, and all of a sudden it was tent time. That's what we did it. It was clap, clap, tent time. And if they heard that around the camp, they ran to the tents.
A hypervigilance these kids learned early on. And they lived like this for about a year, homeschooled, outside, and away from the structures of society.
Hello? Hello?
Perhaps one of the reasons our camera equipment was so exciting.
I'm 10 years old. I honestly thought it was really nice because, so we lived in a little wooded area away from all the drug addicts, and we always got to run around. I used to play my little imagination games off my own little world. It was really fun.
I was teaching them to read and write on my own. But now they're in public school and they're absolutely loving it, but they feel a little bit like they're outcasts. They're outside kids, that's what they call themselves.
Currently, these outside kids live in affordable housing, but say the complex is unsafe.
I'm surrounded by drug dealers and drug addicts, and there's no peace.
They're preparing to move back outdoors.
If it weren't for the fact that it was a roof over my head, I would rather be outside.
The color palette is that of the ocean.
Brandy Tuck runs Path Home in Southeast Portland, one of 3 homeless shelters for families in Multnomah County. Here, they focus on bringing the outside in.
Some of the features of trauma-informed design and architecture include a real connection to nature. So it's about real plants indoors and outdoors, natural material, natural light. When you drive around Portland and you see all these tent villages and RVs everywhere, you don't realize that there are thousands of kids and their parents without homes too. They're the invisible homeless population that hide for fear of something happening to their kids or the state taking their kids away.
Right now, there are 800 homeless families with children on housing waitlists in Multnomah County. Last year, Path Home served 1,800 people. More than half were children, a majority under the age of 5.
The children that experience homelessness today can turn into the chronically homeless adults of the future. And so unless we do something now to help these kids, we'll never be able to solve the issue of homelessness in Portland.
A crisis this single mom has been stranded in for years, unable to find a safe way out.
Portland they care, but something here is going wrong. Taking my kids from me and putting them in foster care is not what's going to keep them safe. Putting us in shelter situations where we can't regulate the people who are around us, that's not going to keep us safe.
So Blair's joined me now, and my gosh, what a heartbreaking story for any parent or grandparent to see something like that. And 800 families.
Yeah, 800 families are currently on the wait list for family shelter in Multnomah County, and that means way more children than that, right? Because many families have more than one child.
How'd you find this family?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a scavenger hunt, and it was pretty challenging, which I think speaks to the importance of this story. This is truly the invisible homeless population.
Yeah.
And in part, that's why there's a lack of resources for them. So anyways, we got some tips that there was homeless families camping out on the Springwater Crossing Trail in Southeast.
Corridor. Yep.
The corridor, yeah. And we hiked that trail for about 5.5 hours looking for families. We talked with neighbors who didn't want to go on camera but told us they hear babies crying at night in the woods that are camping off this trail. I mean, we hiked in the woods, we found so many tent sites, but no one was there, or they were hiding inside, I'm not sure. And it wasn't until we were heading back to the station, we ended up going through an area of North Portland, and we saw a family leaving a grocery store and happened to be homeless, and they were willing to talk with us on camera and share their story.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just think about the reality of those little kids.
Yeah.
And how different that is from most of the kids growing up in our area.
Right, and it was kind of interesting talking with them, because as you and I talking to them, you know, we're like, wow, right? We feel bad for them, or sad, or a myriad of different emotions. But when you're talking to them, they were excited, and they were like, we love camping outside. It's fun for us.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting experience for me to do that interview, because it was a mix of emotions of how I was supposed to be feeling in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And now the mom's most likely taking the kids back out of the shelter because she thinks it's safer to be on the Springwater or somewhere around there.
Yeah, I mean, she talked of getting assaulted at their apartment complex and having drug dealers outside, and she says it's safer for her to live with her children in the woods than it is in affordable housing. And that's just, I don't know, that speaks to a bigger issue, right? She says taking her kids away from her and putting them in foster care isn't going to keep them safe, and neither is this affordable housing complex.
Yeah, which is outrageous.
Yeah.
But
and she's been homeless for years, right? So all she knows, her comfort, is outside in a tent.
yeah, wow. Well, thanks for bringing us that story,
Yeah.
even though it makes me furious. And it makes me furious because that mom ought to be able to be in a shelter that is safe for her and the kids. All right, well, we're on the topic of the homeless crisis. Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler is expected to propose a daytime camping ban on city property, including places like parks and sidewalks. The Willamette Week reports the ban would be in place every day from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Now, those of you in Multnomah County might be wondering, doesn't the city already have bans in place for camping near schools or along high crash corridors? The answer is yes, and it seems to make little difference. Campers are still there. So it begs the question, what does this daytime ban, what does it do? How will it be different? How will it be enforced? The pessimist in me says it's just another grandiose sounding plan that's going to yield small results, if any, but I'm not the only one who feels that way. Todd Littlefield is the vice chair of the Lentz Neighborhood Association. It's an area in southeast Portland that many homeless people flock to. He does not think this new ban is the answer.
We've been intimidated, harassed, threatened, assaulted. I've got bullets in my shop. I've had rifles pointed at my head, property stolen, 24 hours a day. It's chaos. You got people yelling, screaming. It's insane. So we need to have pragmatic solutions, not dreams, not delusions, not fantasies.
So what do you think about the mayor's new plan? Maybe you're more optimistic than I am, maybe not. We'd also love to hear your thoughts on Blair's story about homeless families with children. What was going through your mind? Send us an email, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. The old joke used to be that people in Multnomah County never met a tax they didn't love. Well, that appears to be changing. Last night, voters overwhelmingly rejected a new tax that would have funded eviction lawyers. I mean, seriously, turned the thing down. A whopping 80% of voters said no to Measure 26238.
We were pleasantly surprised by this outcome. In fact, you can go as far back to 2011, the last time a local tax measure was defeated in our community. And I think it should be sending a message right now to policymakers and leaders in the public that you have to work with business in the community to make sure that when you're increasing costs and making investments, that they're done in the right and appropriate way. Because just adding additional burden on households, on businesses, on seniors is probably not the right path right now. And voters are sending a very distinct measure that they know what they want our public officials to be investing in right now.
That was Andrew Hone with the Portland Business Alliance. That group's been fighting hard against the measure. Their State of the Economy report for this year showed that Portland's tax burden has climbed to the second highest in the nation, right behind New York City, which has much higher earners. They say taxes for businesses increased 32% from 2019 to 2021. And in that same time period, 12,000 people left Multnomah County, while many people started choosing Clark County instead. The measure would have raised about $12 to $15 million a year for people facing eviction. Hone told us that the PBA is not against the measure itself, not necessarily against legal representation for people facing eviction, but that this was the wrong way to go about it. Now, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler is trying to freeze some city tax increases and also rates for other services. This afternoon, Mayor Wheeler went over his budget for next year, and he added several amendments that would freeze some city taxes and fees for an entire year. He wants to freeze system development charges for the next year. Those are one-time fees for new development in the city. He also wants to reduce the increases that had been proposed for water and sewer services. He also wants to freeze parking meter rates where they are instead of increasing them by 40 cents an hour, which was approved by the City Council last year.
We want people to stay. And I think people acknowledge that we are at an inflection point in our city. And studies now show that people are choosing not to stay here. They're moving their households, they're moving their places of employment, and they're choosing to invest elsewhere. We're at an inflection point, and I see this as a critical moment in the city's history, an unusual, unprecedented moment in the city's history that we should respond to. And from my perspective, at a time when we are fairly begging people to come to downtown Portland and see that we have improved the situation, and we have, there's still a ton of work to do, but we have improved the situation, and studies show that when people come to downtown Portland, they are twice as likely to have a favorable impression of the city of Portland than prior to coming to downtown Portland. So it's really important at this moment in our history for us not to send mixed signals to say, come to downtown Portland, and oh, by the way, we're increasing the parking meter rates 40% per hour. To me, that just seems inconsistent.
Wheeler said the reductions and freezes would only affect a small amount of the budget for each of the bureaus. But Commissioners Mingus Mapps and Renee Gonzalez weren't buying it. They both voted against the freezes, saying they would result in city workers losing jobs, also services being reduced, and harm to city infrastructure. And they think the freezes would not actually change enough for people, only a few dollars per month. In the end, the mayor did get his way on the water and sewer tax reduction and the development fee freeze. But the commissioners voted not to pause parking fee increases, which means the parking rates are going to go up by 20 cents an hour instead of 40. Coming up next on The Story, Oregon's latest revenue forecast shows positive signs with nearly $2 billion extra available for lawmakers over the next couple of years. That also means the kicker is increasing, how Governor Kotek wants to spend the extra money. Plus, we heard from her today on the GOP walkout in the Senate, what she says about a compromise to get Republicans back in the chamber when The Story returns.
Straight ahead at 6:30, a downtown Portland apartment building that went up in flames yesterday is falling down brick by brick. We hear from a witness who saw it happen. Also ahead, Mayor Ted Wheeler proposing a ban on daytime camping on City of Portland property. Why some are saying it won't make a difference in their neighborhoods. Plus, bridge lift season has arrived on the Portland waterfront when you can expect to see delays as you cross the rising Willamette River. That's next at 6:30. We hope to see you then.
In the meantime, welcome back. Oregon economists have looked into their crystal ball and announced an extra $1.9 billion will be available for lawmakers to spend over the next 2 years. Now, they don't really have a crystal ball, I know. It's more like spreadsheet upon spreadsheet. It is a big deal, though, and it's a lot of money, and the governor wants to spend it all. One of the biggest chunks would go to homeless programs.
We need another $316 million to respond to our housing and homelessness crisis. This builds on the early assistance package and also maintains the momentum so we can keep people from becoming homeless. We can help people who are on the streets get into shelter, and we can make sure people can be rehoused and stay rehoused. This is very important. It's a statewide issue, and we need additional resources for the rest of the biennium.
That $316 million would be on top of the $200 million the governor already got lawmakers to allocate for homeless-related programs over the next 2 years. The governor also wants another $280 million spent on behavioral health care statewide and $120 million for early literacy programs. That's all on top of the money that's already allocated for programs by the legislature. And because I know you enjoy deep dives that you can't get on other newscasts, let's take a look at the numbers. First, you need to realize this forecast was very special and a very big deal. Every 2 years in May, Oregon economists finalize how much money came in for the last 2-year budget and how much they expect to come in for the next 2-year budget. Well, the forecast for the last 2-year budget, which ends in a couple of months, was $23,228,910,000. The actual revenue, as it turns out, was $30,509,906,000. That is a pretty big difference, a difference of $7.2 billion. The forecast was off by roughly 31%. Why was it off? Well, the economists say it's because our economy bounced back quickly, more quickly than they expected after COVID, and also inflation. Inflation pushed up people's income, but it also made things more expensive, so businesses made more money. That sent taxpayers into higher tax brackets and brought in a lot of money for the state. And the fact that the actual revenue was more than 2% above the forecast revenue, well, taxpayers are going to get a kicker. Roughly $5.5 billion in tax refunds for next year will be sent back to taxpayers when we file our taxes. That's the kicker. And there's a business kicker too, by the way. It's about $1.7 billion, but lawmakers are keeping that money and spending it. By the way, the revenue forecast for the next 2-year budget is $25,179,994,000. That's an increase of about 8.3% over the starting amount for the last 2-year budget. By the way, while the governor was talking with reporters today, she was asked about the ongoing walkout staged by Republicans in the Senate. Her answer suggests a hardened position.
It's important to always listen and negotiate. I also don't think we negotiate over things that Oregonians care about. What's troubling to me is there are 2 major pieces of legislation that the vast majority of Oregonians support. So you don't negotiate those things away. But you do negotiate on other things that could benefit all parts of the state. So I am open to conversations. I think we should just be clear that you don't set aside things that the vast majority of Oregonians care about and support.
Did you get the talking point? Vast majority care about and support. Republicans have offered to return and pass budgets and other bills if Democrats would just set aside those 2 bills that they hate. One allows a child under 14 to get an abortion without a parent's permission. The same bill requires insurance companies to cover gender-affirming care. A second bill says no one under 21 can buy a gun except for a hunting rifle or a shotgun. But the president of the Senate and the governor say that's a non-starter. They're not moving those aside. The governor was asked what happens if the walkout lasts the entire session, which ends June 25th.
We need to show Oregonians that we can do our work here. I I'm an optimistic person. I think if we listen to each other and really think about what our communities need, we can get back at the table and solve this problem. Certainly, if the session ends and we don't have everything we need, then I will take whatever tools I have to make sure we can get the budgets done. But I'm focused on now and the end of June to make sure we do the work. And I don't have any plans for anything past that at this point.
The governor noted that state agencies can keep functioning until September under a recently signed continuing resolution. She also noted that she can call lawmakers back for a special session. Coming up next on The Story, new details on that 4-alarm fire in southwest Portland on Tuesday that gutted an apartment building built back in 1910. Plus, we've learned it's not the first major fire at that building. The details on a blaze from more than a century ago that claimed the life of a firefighter at the very same building. We'll have that when The Story returns. Now let's get back to our top story from yesterday's show. This 4-alarm fire in southwest Portland's Goose Hollow neighborhood that displaced about 100 people. Several of them needed to be rescued by firefighters, but amazingly, there were no serious injuries. Firefighters are still monitoring the building, which is at risk of collapsing. In fact, a city engineer has red tagged the building. That means no civilians inside. We're told on Friday a special 3D drone will be used to fly over what's left of the building to try and determine how the fire started. Turns out this is not the first major fire at the May Apartments at 1410 Southwest Taylor. It was built back in 1910. There was another blaze there over a century ago that claimed the life of a Portland firefighter. On June 15, 1921, Lieutenant Carl Gunster and his crew responded to the May Apartments and found a fire that started in a basement tool room that had spread up to every story of the building. The crews got their ladders and started rescuing people from the upper floors, but Lieutenant Gunster entered through a third-floor window and was quickly overcome by smoke. Remember, this was long before the use of oxygen and heavy-duty masks. Shortly afterwards, another firefighter found Gunster's body and dragged him to the window to get out. After getting his body to the ground, they tried to resuscitate Gunster for about an hour before pronouncing him dead. In the end, 7 others were hospitalized, 4 firefighters and 3 civilians. The investigation revealed the most likely cause of the fire, oily rags in the tool room, and it caused $75,000 in damages way back in 1921 money. 41-year-old Carl Gunster, a veteran of the Spanish-American War and then president of the Portland Firefighters Association, left behind a wife and 4 children. In 1927, a fireboat would be named in Gunster's honor, meaning he was obviously held in high regard. He's one of 76 fallen Portland firefighters who are remembered each year during a memorial service at the end of June. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. Stick around now for the news at 6:30. I'll see you right back here tomorrow.